The Cuban president has outlined the country's strategy for economic recovery in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Russian Defense Ministry said on Wednesday it had developed a safe coronavirus vaccine following clinical trials on a group of volunteers. Gabon has appointed its first ever woman Prime Minister. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. This Thursday, in an extraordinary meeting of the Cuban Council of Ministers, President Miguel Díaz-Canel explained the strategy for economic recovery in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Cuban president outlined the adoption of an economic and social strategy to recover from the impact of COVID-19, noting that the National Plan for Economic and Social Development through 2030, adopted during the 7th Congress of the Communist Party, as well as the economic and social policy guidelines of the party and the revolution, had served as the basis for this strategy. He also stressed that the world faces great economic challenges, not only Cuba, which is also subject to a criminal US blockade, and that the Cuban government will never abandon its population.
But the complex situation is not only in Cuba, it is the case around the world. And in the midst of this situation, we continue to propose and seek solutions for everybody. There is no government in the world that concerns itself like us about whether its people eat every day or not. Every day we are immersed in the search for solutions to all these issues, thinking and feeling as a nation, thinking and acting for the common good. And we have to explain that sometimes, in order to benefit everybody, we must take measures that could be seen to benefit just a few, but that in the long run will be beneficial for all. I want you to remember that in recent months, we have faced numerous attempts to prevent the arrival of fuel to our ports, a shortage of foodstuff, supplies and raw materials to sustain important productive services, and also sanctions that have diminished our hard currency revenue amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
Ecuador's health ministry reported 49 new COVID-19 fatalities over the last 24 hours, while noting that over 3,000 other deaths have been registered from symptoms similar to those caused by the novel coronavirus. The death toll in Ecuador now stands at over 5,200. Meanwhile, over 1,000 new cases were confirmed, taking the total to over 71,000. Since the first case was reported on February 29th, health authorities have carried out over 190,000 tests. According to the official data, over 31,000 patients have recovered from the virus. The Ecuadorian government continues to face criticism of its mishandling of the health crisis, with cases of widespread corruption in the acquisition of medical supplies and doubts cast over the gap between the official figures and the reality on the ground. Colombian President Iván Duque has rejected the request of the medical and scientific community to reactivate the strict lockdown in Bogotá for 14 days, given a surge in COVID-19 cases, which has the health system on the brink of collapse. According to the president, smaller local lockdowns would be more sustainable. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Duque has failed to approve many of the health measures recommended by the World Health Organization due to the economic impact they might have. According to epidemiologists, the Colombian government's mishandling of the crisis has prevented the effective control of the coronavirus. Colombia now places 4th in South America, according to official data, with more than 165,000 cases and almost 6,000 COVID-19 fatalities. Venezuela has denounced before the international community the illegal entry of a US warship in its territorial waters. In a statement, Foreign Minister Jorge Arias rejected the statements of the US Southern Command, which claimed that Venezuela makes excessive maritime claims over what it described as international waters. The USS Pinky destroyer sailed 16.1 miles off the Venezuelan coast. The Foreign Minister stressed that this action violates international law and was a clear act of provocation carried out as a result of President Donald Trump's recent visit to Florida, where he met with figures opposed to the legitimate Venezuelan government. Venezuelan Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez this Thursday offered an update on the COVID-19 figures in the country. Rodriguez reported 345 locally transmitted cases and 81 imported cases confirmed in the last 24 hours, making for a total of 426 new cases. Zulia State has seen the biggest increase, reporting 142 of the new cases. The COVID-19 death toll stands at 104. The Nicaraguan electricity company is conducting studies on geothermal energy as part of efforts to generate clean energy. Geothermal energy is the second most widely available source to generate clean energy in Nicaragua. The development of this energy source requires multiple studies in order to identify the characteristics of geothermal fields in the country. In Nicaragua's case, the areas of Laguna de Apoyo, the Mombacho volcano and the Casita San Cristobal geothermal project are already in the exploration phase after being identified as having the highest energy generating potential. A new cloud of dust from the Sahara Desert is moving towards the Caribbean. According to Cuban expert Jose Rubiera, although the latest cloud is much smaller than the one that affected the region in mid-June, it will help prevent hurricanes. The specialist explained that the arrival of dust from the distant Sahara Desert to the Caribbean region is normal at this time of year. He added that the cloud was expected to arrive in the next few days, but would not cause visible effects such as those seen a few weeks ago. This phenomenon suppresses hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean because the atmosphere is loaded with very dry air that inhibits rains. In the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, local initiatives have emerged to help people get through the long periods of lockdown, including children. In Mexico City, Percival Garcia, a young Mexican architect, walks around his neighborhood with a speaker and a book, reading stories and playing music to thousands of children confined in their homes due to the coronavirus, hoping to keep them entertained and prevent them feeling isolated.
This began with a deep worry over how children are experiencing the lockdown caused by the quarantine. One day, when I was here in Tlatelolco with my mom, we heard a child shout from his window, "I'm bored." So for us, it was a realization that just like we are having a hard time, children are having a hard time.
She is playing, and when she hears the music, she starts shouting at me, "Mom, Mom, the storyteller," and then she wants me to put her by the window to listen to him and talk to him.
And we're taking a very short break now, but we will be right back, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. American Airlines is set to lay off more than 25,000 employees, a move that it claims is due to the slowdown in air travel in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The figure represents 20% of the company's workforce. Frontline workers received warnings about the possible job cuts this fall. Among those who may lose their jobs are 2,500 pilots, 10,000 flight attendants, and 3,200 mechanics. American Airlines is the world's largest airline when measured by fleet size, scheduled passengers carried, and revenue per passenger mile. China's foreign ministry has condemned the US clampdown on Chinese telecom giant Huawei and also criticized Washington's human rights record by pointing to systemic racism in the United States.
I think what it does has anything to do with the war clean. What it does is genuine dirty tricks and dirty play. From where does Secretary of State Mike Pompeo get us confidence to talk to China about the human rights? If he really wants to speak about it, I think he'd better ask George Floyd and the ethnic minorities in the USA what they think about the human rights is our situation. If Mr. Pompeo is sincere, we can refrain from imposing visa restriction on him. We're walking here to visit Kenyan and have talked there with people of ethnic groups to find out what they think of him. I can introduce him to the few Agar friends.
The Russian Defense Ministry said on Wednesday it had developed a safe coronavirus vaccine following clinical trials on a group of volunteers. According to the ministry, a group of 18 people participated in the research and their immunity is working well and antibodies are being created. The Defense Ministry did not say whether the vaccine had proven to be completely effective, but a doctor working on the trial said the volunteers were now protected against the novel coronavirus. A second group of participants who were vaccinated on June 23rd are currently in isolation in a hospital under medical supervision. The Defence Ministry says it expects that the clinical trials will be fully completed by the end of July. Badly hit by the coronavirus pandemic, Spain paused on Thursday to honour the tens of thousands of victims at a state ceremony, which saw the attendance of top European Union and World Health Organization figures. The memorial took place barely 3 weeks after Spain ended its state of emergency. Since then, there has been a surge in new coronavirus cases, with health chiefs monitoring more than 120 active outbreaks. Presided by Spanish King Felipe VI, the memorial took place in a square outside the Royal Palace in the presence of bereaved families. So far, the coronavirus has officially claimed more than 28,000 lives in Spain, making it the 7th worst hit country in the world.
Este acto no puede reparar el dolor de muchas familias.
This act cannot repair the pain of many families who were not able to be next to their loved ones in their final hours, much less attenuate the sadness of their absence. But we hope it can do justice to their lives, to their contribution to our society, to their memory. We are not going to forget any of those who lost their lives in this painful moment of our history, because memory is a duty. That is the best homage we can give to them, being united in remembering them and building together the country they would have wanted to share.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison on Thursday ruled out the prospect of the country attempting to eradicate the coronavirus, describing it as a risky strategy. Australia initially enjoyed similar success to that of neighbouring New Zealand in suppressing the rapid spread of COVID-19 in the early weeks of the pandemic. The strategy has succeeded in New Zealand, but just as Australia was lifting its lockdown restrictions, breaches of quarantine controls led to community transmission of the virus in Victoria State. Morrison said Victoria's daily high on Thursday was a concerning setback, but an Australian eradication policy would be more expensive.
The Victorian situation is very concerning, but as I think the Chief Health Officer in Victoria was remarking today, they are, I think, hopeful that what we're seeing is those figures starting to level out. I said yesterday that I thought this would still be at a high level for some time, but as the effects of the lockdown, I think, kick in, then hopefully we'll see those new case numbers fall. And so, yes, it is a big setback.
The European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief, Joseph Borrell, acknowledged the resumption of face-to-face talks between Serbia and Kosovo on Thursday, while highlighting the role of the EU in the process.
The President of Serbia and the Prime Minister of Kosovo are today with us here in Brussels for the first in-person meeting. And by meeting for the second time in a week, the two leaders show their firm commitment to the EU-facilitated dialogue among them. And I had to welcome that very much. Today, I expect a constructive discussion on the first element of our talks, which will contribute to the comprehensive normalization of the relations between Kosovo and Serbia. I encourage both sides to approach today's talks in the spirit of compromise and pragmatism, and with the European future for their people in Kosovo and Serbia in their mind.
Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin addressed the Brexit process following an official visit to Northern Ireland this Thursday. The issue of the United Kingdom's exit from the EU has sparked fears over the impact on border issues between the Republic of Ireland and the North.
We needed to look forward in terms of ensuring that Brexit would cause the least damage to the economic fabric of the island, and that we would work together in terms of minimising any economic disruption, hoping for, of course, the most comprehensive free trade deal between Britain and the European Union, which I think is something that we all desire. And given the enormous change that is taking place, there is a need to do some significant work together in terms of how that shared island will evolve and how we share the island in peace and in harmony, and trying to maximise economic development into the future.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Gabon has appointed its first ever woman Prime Minister. The Gabonese President's Office announced that Rose Christian Osoka Raponda was appointed Prime Minister this Thursday to become the first woman to hold the post in the country's history. According to a statement, the new PM's mission will include relaunching Gabon's economy in the context of the global crisis sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic. Specialising in public finance, Osoka Raponda, aged 56, graduated from the Gabonese Institute of Economy and Finance. She became Budget Minister in 2012 and then the first woman mayor of the capital, Libreville, in 2014. A primary healthcare centre in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, reopened its doors on Thursday in order to provide essential medical services amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The centre was supplied with new equipment and training delivered by the UN Refugee Agency and the International Rescue Committee. The centre is one of just 3 primary healthcare centres operating in the area, home to more than 450,000 people. Meanwhile, restrictions have recently been eased in Libya, although nighttime and weekend curfews are still in place. Libyan health authorities have reported over 1,600 COVID-19 cases and a death toll of 46. Kenyan health authorities confirmed 421 new COVID-19 cases on Thursday, taking the total number to over 11,600.
Today, in the last 24 hours, we carried out 3,895 tests. Out of those tests, 421 have tested positive. Therefore, we now have 11,673 positive cases in the country. From the cases, 409 are Kenyans, while 12 are foreigners. As has been the trend, 297, almost 300 of those are men or male, while 124 are female.
Humanitarian aid was delivered to the town of Tambura, South Sudan on Thursday to assist hundreds of people fleeing recent violence in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The humanitarian convoy loaded with food and supplies was escorted by a battalion of Ethiopian peacekeepers and military liaison officers. Tambura in the western equatorial state of South Sudan has offered shelter to thousands of refugees who were forced to flee their homes. Meanwhile, the total number of COVID-19 cases reported in South Sudan stands at over 2,100.
For food, they distributed maize, cereals and oil. This distribution was for 15 days. But now, according to the report, that the situation has gone back to normal, and all these IDPs have returned to their places, and there is no any insecurity anymore.
The biggest challenge we face during this patrol has to do with the road infrastructure, which is very poor. The rainy season has made it even worse. With a single trip, we had 11 vehicles that broke down, but thanks to our mechanics on board, they fixed them and we keep.
The Sudanese government and a coalition of rebel groups entered a final phase of peace talks on Thursday while addressing the creation of a unified Sudanese army. The negotiations have resulted in a timeline of 39 months for a transitional period after the signing of a comprehensive peace agreement.
The security arrangement is one of the most important documents for the peace process, in that it addresses the issues of the biggest manifestations of injustice in Sudan and the bloody war between a people which resulted in the independence of South Sudan and the massacres that continue till today, and on top of that, the genocide in Darfur. We are fully ready to find a final peace agreement to avoid taking advantages of the security bodies for political, ethnic, or even ideological disputes. And this cannot happen except by security arrangements with target security bodies around the country, a security sector that respects the Constitution and is held responsible before the law to serve the citizens and the country. The political negotiations are done and only the security arrangement remains. And that is the key in the agreement, the security aspects. And if we discuss it here in good faith and sign on it, it will pave the way to signing the final agreement that all the parties agreed on with all the security sectors.
The World Health Organization Regional Director for Africa this Thursday noted growing concern over the recent Ebola outbreak in the northwest of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
There are now 56 cases, and this is of great concern, particularly as it is now surpassing the previous outbreak in this area, which was closed off and controlled at a total of 54 cases. Some cases are located in remote areas surrounded by rainforests, demanding additional capacities and resources.
Following a meeting with Libyan tribal leaders from the eastern city of Benghazi on Thursday, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi noted that Egypt will always insist on a peaceful solution to the conflict in Libya.
Believe me, we are not thinking about how we will leave Libya if we enter it. I am not saying that we will enter. We will not enter unless you ask me to, and I will leave when you order us to leave. Despite Egypt's quick ability to change the military scene in Libya, Egypt will always insist on a peace solution through negotiations between all Libyan parties. In the name of the Libyan people, we say that we don't see the Egyptian army's intervention in Libya to protect it from Turkish intrusion and colonialism as intrusive or as a will to obtain Libya's wealth.
Mali's opposition June 5th movement and envoys of the Economic Community of West African States met this Thursday to address the escalating political crisis in the country. Former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan is heading the envoy mission that arrived in Bamako on Wednesday. Leading figures of the June 5th movement noted that instead of demonstrations set to take place on Friday, a memorial service will be held for those killed during recent violent protests, in which 11 people were reported dead and over 150 injured. The opposition June 5th movement has formed an alliance of political, social and civil society leaders demanding political reforms in the country. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesoenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube. For Teleso English, I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.